Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you here to IAC, to this year's opening lecture. This event marks the beginning of the academic year, and so I would like to take this opportunity to first and foremost welcome our new and also old students back once again. These people are coming from all over the world and studying here in our postgraduate and master programs. I would also like to give a very, very warm welcome to our faculty and friends of IAC, as well as those of you who are discovering IAC for the first time, and hopefully not for the last time. For those of you who have come from far and near, welcome. And as well, I would like to welcome my lovely colleagues. I hope you enjoy the evening with us, and I would like to ask you to please help me welcome our academic director, Areti Markopoulou, to the stage, who will give the welcoming speech. Thank you.
For the ones you don't know, that was Matilde Marengo, our academic coordinator. Ben, can you hear me? I can scream. I can also take it out. Hello? Okay. I was just saying that for the ones that you don't know, this is Matilde Marengo, our academic coordinator, and it was very funny that Ben entered the house and he asked, "Is this place run by women? Is it?" Anyway, that was a very nice comment. So good afternoon from my side as well. It's great to see the house full. It's always nice. It's also an honor for you, Ben, I think. And it's the opening lecture of our IAC lecture series. But as you know, we always take this moment to combine it with the official opening and launching of our academic year and our master's, postgraduate and PhD programs. So first of all, I want to welcome Ben Van Berkel, founder and principal, as you all know, of UNStudio in Amsterdam, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. A pioneer architect that he managed to imagine, design, and construct like an enormous amount of buildings around the globe. For me personally, has been always a reference. I remember many years back staring at the manimal form for hours, trying to reflect on the ideas of non-linearity, unfolding, and hybridization that is bringing to architecture. And I think what is interesting is to be able to combine the practice in the architectural discipline with a strong theoretical background, and that is Ben, and of course his amazing team and his colleagues. So Ben, first of all, thank you for being here today. It's a big pleasure. Thank you. But I would also like to thank the 130 students that they are coming from 41 different countries around the globe. And it's a new tradition now. Every year in my welcome speech, I announce the countries one by one, because I think it is very important. This kind of multicultural identity that you are bringing here is one of the main principles of IAC, and it's one of the main forces of IAC. So allow me to start with naming them, and they are Australia, Austria, Bangladesh, Brazil, Bulgaria, Canada, China, Colombia, Croatia, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, France, Germany, Greece, Holland, Iceland, India, Indonesia, Iran, Ireland, Italy, Jordan, Lebanon, Macedonia. Lebanese people have a loud voice, huh? Mexico, Pakistan, Peru, Poland, Romania, Russia, Slovakia, South Korea, Spain, Sri Lanka, Syria, Taiwan, Thailand, Turkey, UK, and USA. Welcome 41 countries, welcome people. So it is really a big challenge for IAC to be able to be the incubator for such diverse culture, since through our educational models, we wish to generate knowledge through exchange, making, and sharing. And each one of you, 41 countries, 130 students, you are filling the space of IAC today, and if not yet, you will very quickly realize that this is not a traditional school. We like to call it a laboratory. We like to call it a laboratory of education, of production, and of innovation. And as in any kind of laboratory in the world, what it's for sure is that you will get your hands dirty, you will definitely learn out of making, and you will go through endless, sleepless, desperate nights. So we warn you from the very beginning, but never doubt that you will be contributing to building the future in the present. I want to say that here at IAC, we wish to treat you not as purely students, but as we call you change makers. The change makers that our discipline and society needs, but also the change makers that aim to question stereotypes, develop new visions and tools for architecture, try, fail, and try again. We also want to learn together with all of you, students, faculty, and collaborators, not just teach you what we know, but together bring the architectural imagination into reality. Our methodology is based on two main strategies. The one is the possibility and the necessity to act on multiple scales, and on the other hand, the necessity for the integration of multiple disciplines. So don't be shocked if we ask you not only to design buildings and master plans, but also to use a microscope to grow your material or to program a chip. And also, do not hesitate to get into our collaborators that you will find around the whole house, that they bring knowledge outside of the discipline of architecture, such as biology, ecology, engineering, or manufacturing. You will also realize that one of the main EX commitments is to merge basic with applied research. Through our educational programs, we materialize our ideas, we test pilot projects, and we are counting with the expertise of our industry partners to do so. At the same time, we count with the support of the European Commission, the European agency in Brussels, that they have granted us numerous European research grants that run for the last 3 years. We like to see IAC as a small, independent and global hub of visionary people. From Barcelona, together with local associations and professionals, we work together to set up the basis to be the pioneers on the transformation of the present and the future of our cities. In this sense, actually, we kicked off the year a few weeks back with an international symposium of responsive city, where we contributed to place Barcelona as the reference of the architecture and urban think tank. So we are now working hard for our next edition, and you are, of course, all welcome to join us into that. So basically, IAC, I would say that, sorry, it would be nothing without its community. Its community is the essence of IAC, and it is the stimuli to make IAC grow. We now count more than 1,000 alumni in 70 different countries, more than 100 local and international faculty, and of course partnerships with numerous international companies and institutions. As I was saying, this is the stimuli to make IAC grow and evolve. The last year, we have almost doubled our team, incorporating international and local experts in different fields. In parallel, we are setting up new educational programs focused on urbanism, interaction, and manufacturing, so new programs to come. We are leading new challenges on urban sciences and self-sufficiency, as well as in Fab Cities, led by people of IAC, such as the founders Vicente Guayart, William Muller, as well as Tomás Díez, the director of Fab Lab. So we're also expanding our cooperation with the European Commission on applied research projects with new European grants. And all this, understanding that there are new challenges in architecture and design. And those challenges, most of the times, must be considered and must make us think and act out of the box. and with the final goal, of course, to improve the present and the future of our society. With no more words, I just want to welcome you to the IA community, and I want to thank you not only for being here today, but mainly for your contribution to make IA collaboratory knowledge grow and evolve. Thank you very much.
So now it's loud. Thank you very much, Areti. It's now a pleasure for me to introduce Ben Van Berkel. As Areti mentioned before, Ben Van Berkel is the founder and principal architect of UNStudio, which can be found in Amsterdam, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. He studied at the Rietveld Academy and also at the AA in London. He was recently awarded with the Kenzo Tange Visiting Professor's Chair in the Harvard GSD, and is the winner, along with Caroline Boss and the UNStudio team, of the BNA Cubus Award for 2016, the highest honor bestowed by the Royal Institute of Dutch Architects. UNStudio is a network of specialists in architecture, urban development, and infrastructure. Current projects include the design of Doha's integrated metro network in Qatar, the Raffles City mixed-use development in Hangzhou, and the Canaletto Tower in London. It is a pleasure to invite Ben Van Berkel to the stage for this evening's lecture. Please help me welcome him.
Good evening. I'm always excited to be back in Barcelona. I think it's close to 10 years, or I think you mentioned tonight 8 years ago that I was here in this place to give a talk, but my fascination with the city goes much further back. It goes even back to the middle of the 90s and even earlier than that. In the time when I was close friend with Enrique Miralles, when I for the first time started to get to know how much depth and innovation was going on in the city, I slowly started to discover who Pignon and Villaplana were as architects, and if you look at the history books, then of course maybe they are in the Spanish history books, but not in the European history books of architecture. And over the years, I've always admired the powerful Spanish architectural culture. And stayed, luckily enough, with many friends in touch in order to share ideas with each other. And maybe that's why I'm going to talk about tonight, also related to my topic. I'm going to talk about only one project. It sounds boring, but it is a project I worked on for 20 years. So you can imagine that it is quite diverse in its experience, and also full of experiments, practicalities. So many things I learned from it that I can even say that it was the project what gave me so many new insights in the role of how I believe the architect needs to operate today. So it predicted for me a lot. And that connects me to a recent book we just published. Maybe you've heard about it, Knowledge Matters. I'm not going to talk about the book in detail because I never like these presentations when architects start to promote their books. But I touch on it very briefly here in the beginning, simply because Knowledge Matters is dealing with the fact that we, over the years, I hope, do you hear me in the back actually? Yes? Okay, good. Because I hear an echo in my own voice, but if you don't hear that, then I'm happy. So over the years, we have learned, with all this diverse knowledge we have worked with, that it is so important to start to group these, what we call knowledge platforms, within the organization of the architectural practice. So we call them knowledge platforms because whenever you come into UNStudio as a trainee or as a young architect, you have the first 2 months you have to be in one of these platforms, and even the trainees, they are only allowed to work not in a project but only to work in the platforms. And the platforms are related to highly diverse research we do on the level of new computational techniques. Like the latest thing is that we are now designing in the VR room. You will all like it. I mean, everyone for 10 to 20 years talked about parametric design techniques, but now we test them out in the VR room. So that's the latest development. We are incredibly interested in material effects. So what do materials do to the environment, to its health, the sustainability of it, etc. And particularly how it is connected to its health and people. And I'm not going to talk about this so much again tonight, but indirectly I will come back to it later on, because of course you have to always remember as an architect that architecture is in a way a form of background what supports public constructs and the way how people operate within that space. But I will explain that through the Arnhem Station project. And the third platform is related to innovative organizational strategy. So that's related to the way how we combine programs, innovate programs, and often do the research on the level there, whereby the program is sometimes hybridized in such a manner that, for instance, sometimes where we then might use a cultural strategy towards the way how it can be related towards a more infrastructural project, for instance. So here all these experiments are done in these platforms related to the central platform, related to topics around sustainability. And the key is of these platforms, whenever you come into the studio, you might be happy to be for 2 or 3 months in a platform, but if you're then going slowly in the projects and you learn that you like to do another research, you might move to another platform. So it became an educational system within the whole organization of the way how we educate ourselves within the practice. So whereby also the things we learn from the projects, or the things we want to learn within the projects, we apply to these platforms also with external specialists. So from the teaching towards scientists, even artists who are connected to this whole complex but quite important network of the studio. And actually, in essence, that is where the book talks about, and I will talk about it indirectly now through the project. But you have to imagine, when we started UNStudio, we still thought that being in a network of specialists and architects, that it was important not to be an architect in the traditional manner anymore, that you would be an architect standing in front of the orchestra and would say, well, guys, this is my sketch and this is what you have to turn into a design, and if you are not really doing that well, then you're out, or something like that. That's not anymore how we believed in the late 90s how architecture was operating. We learned that it was far more fascinating to walk through the orchestra and to play with every specialist you could find within the practice, but also outside the practice, in order to combine the actors in the network, in order to make your projects more intelligent and hopefully more sharper in the way how they would be on all the levels of the knowledge they would bring it together. The most interesting in how they could work. But over the last years, moving from the network to a more knowledge organization, we work more in a meshwork structure. So that doesn't mean that we don't have groups anymore in the studio where like in the decentralized structure. I hope I can find, yeah. So this is the way how we used to work in the beginning of the practice of UNStudio, where we would have different groups and the team members in the group, and whenever there was an idea or something to be exchanged, then it was done by the actors. But now more or less everyone is part of the actor system, and also everyone is in the design studio whenever we have a design meeting. So the meshwork structure of the way how we organize ourselves is becoming more and more important. But that means also that it is connected to the stretching up of the profession. I've learned that 20 years ago, I would sometimes talk with a client or a politician, for instance, only with him alone in the room when we had to deal with a project around, let's say, 20 million euros. But today, clients are professionalized. They have far more specialists themselves. You know yourself how much regulations now there have been developed in the profession, how much experiments we can do in architecture, and it was wonderfully explained already in the beginning of the night that we can refer to many aspects in our culture of architecture today, from fashion design to product design to the way how we can refer to literature. So everything is in a way allowed within the profession of architecture, but the same, I would say, should be applied to the scientific and the much more harder side of the profession. So if you think of the two complicated aspects of the way how the profession has been stretched up over so many years, and particularly very much over the last 10 years, that gave so much opportunity to rethink how we need to organize ourselves, and also rethink the position of the role of the architect in order of how we bring our projects together. And that means also that we, with this knowledge, can rethink also the typologies of projects where we work on, and I will explain that within this project, because Arnhem is a project or a complex project whereby we were asked to rethink the central part of the city connected to its station, because the station built after the war was not fully functioning anymore as it used to. It used to be a station with 2 bus stations. It had no car park area. There was no place for bicycles. The density of the amount of people coming to the train station, more than over 20,000 people, were not fitting anymore in the train station. And you see that over the evolution of time, many stations have been built in that city, but as we are quite fortunate within Holland to always renew our stations, this station also needed to be rethought, and especially the area around the station. But what I thought was so interesting is that it was a political question. It came from the government. The government had written a note, or you could call it a political policy, a manifesto in a way, whereby they argued that public transport should be more stimulated. And how could that be done? Was their argument? By intensifying the ground around the train stations. And I thought that it was so nice to rethink that question of what could these areas mean around the train stations, and would it not be interesting to rethink the station in general? Because, I mean, in Holland over the years also many stations became the back door of the city. They became negative spaces because of the maybe not only the use of the way, or maybe not only how they were used in the way how they connected themselves towards the capacity of people, but particularly also in the way how they were actually not allowing more program to be connected towards the stations. But I thought also that if you go back to the history of stations, that it didn't connect them, the stations were not connected to the idea of the uplifting quality of traveling, like we know from the Grand Central Station, or the quality of celebrating that you are leaving the town. And this powerful image of the Grand Central Station and also the Eastern Station Great Hall in London were playing with this idea of the spectacle of traveling. And I thought maybe that was something we needed to bring back to the station. Another aspect what I discovered when I was working on the train station was that when in the beginning, when we had to study the tunnel and the area around the train station, there were two bus stations: a trolley bus, an electrical bus station, and a regional bus station. And the square was almost asymmetrically placed from the entrance tunnel towards the platforms. So you have to imagine here the platforms, and this was the tunnel where you could go down and then move to the square. But I mean, if you would come onto the platforms, there was no roofing. So when I came here, so even more than 20 years ago, then you would stand in the rain, you would go through the tunnel, and you would stand again in the rain when you would come out of the station. And it was really not clear which bus was connected to which part of the infrastructure or region you had to go to. So the idea was to place the square in the middle and to start to think about if it would be possible to make an integral whole or a transfer location whereby many aspects of the connecting parts of the infrastructure could be brought to this heart of the location. So from, as I mentioned, the regional bus, the trolley bus, an entrance park towards the bicycle parking, what we introduced on the lower level, the entrance towards the train station, the kiss and ride area. On top we have an entrance towards the taxi area. So many qualities needed to be connected to that central heart of the. Another thing what I discovered was that this ground until this area was not from the train community or the train government. This was from the city. And when the city started to argue for, the government wants a new train station, they said, why do you want to only think about the station alone? We helped them to argue that the amount of people being on this side, the density was much higher than the amount of people coming out of the train station moving towards the city. So we said that people are more important than ground value, because people generate, of course, a certain amount of value when they come to the site and they use certain programs on the site. And you know, it's quite a simple argument. You could say you can have a wonderful shop on the most beautiful spot with the highest value in the middle of the city, but if you have no people, then you have no shop. So that was the argument. And slowly on, when we came with the statistics and with all the calculations of the engineers, we started to really prove that could work, to make not a train station alone, but to make a transfer location, a transfer hall for the whole location. Another aspect of Arnhem is that it's actually one of the cities with a little bit an height difference, and you know, every Dutchman is happy with every little hill, even if it is 1 meter, then we are happy, because we have no mountains. And the height difference between this part of the location and the lower part of the location is 7 meters. So we use this landscape move in order to open and cut open the aspects of the entrance area for the car park and the entrance area for the bike area. So, but what I thought also was one of the aspects of the quality of time traveling through all these different infrastructure elements was that it would be so interesting that it would be a place where you would feel comfortably connected to an all-round time machine, that whenever you would stand in one part of the hall or another part of the hall, that you would always know where to move to and where to go to, so that you would feel being watched by others, and that you would feel safe, and that you would feel to be part of a total machine, and transfer machine, as you can call it. You can see here the project under construction. These are the new roofs we introduced for the train station, the platforms. the transfer hall. But what is the most interesting of this picture is in a way also the way how it connects itself towards the landscape of Arnhem, and it's quite beautiful. Not only on this side of the city, but also on the front side, where even the landscape of the city goes higher than the train station. So you can literally look onto the train station. Another argument was to think more, and that was a political argument. It was not our argument, but it was something that the government and also the European government promoted, was to think more to the economical areas of the Randstad and the Ruhrgebiet, the German Ruhrgebiet, and to see if the high-speed train, but it's not going so fast in Holland, pity enough, because Holland is so dense and the cities are so close to each other that by the time you're driving 150, you have to start slowing down again. So you can do that in Germany, but maybe not so much in Arnhem. But although, I mean, we could actually speed it up and make Arnhem a more important central place between its cultural activities within the city, because it's a wonderful cultural place. And maybe you've heard of the fantastic fashion school they have in Arnhem, but also amount of museums, apart from that, give it them also a bit more economical position in the regions of these two economical attractors. In the early phase of the project, we started to think about the way how we could introduce clockwise activities on the location, so that whenever you would come onto the site, that you would always have people moving to a housing part of the project or to their office, or that there would be quick program, as we called it, or slow program onto the location. So on the lower part of the station we had quick program, so where people could quickly move into some of the cafes or the restaurants or little shops on the train station to be used while they were traveling. But the slow program was more introduced in the higher part of the section of the location. And the reason why we did this was because we didn't want to have these what we call the grey holes within the site, so that it would create always a form of liveliness on the location, even when you would be on the location. So after 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, and that was a major problem of not only the Arnhem train station, but of many stations in Holland. That if you would move there, especially in a less dense city than Arnhem, there after 8 or 9 o'clock, then you would feel not very not safe, but also not secured with other people around you when you would be on that side. So that was the reason why we introduced this clockwise planning strategy. But what slowly on we discovered while we were growing into the project, and the government and the local government and the city government, or the regional government and also the city government started to believe that this project could work for this location. We discovered that by 4 years we had close to 8 different clients. So learning from Arnhem is that we here discovered that you cannot work only as an architect on a location like this alone. We were here urban planners, we were half politicians, and maybe in essence we were public scientists to discover how this project could operate properly and how it could be supported by the government, because there was a lot of money, of course, involved in the project. And here you see, I'm not going to explain all the details of this, but here you see all the different elements related to the project, from the way how we needed to work on the tunnels connected towards the train station, from the platforms, as I mentioned, a bridge. There is a bridge here what connects one part of the city to the other part of the bridge, and sound wall. So many elements were connected to these large details of the project. Oh, this is not working anymore. But anyway, so I wanted to explain sorry, this is not working, but here I was going to explain the different infrastructural elements towards the connecting heart of the train station, but I do that later on. Here you see the staggering of all the programs. Sorry. So you have on the lower level the parking, but you have also bicycle parking on this part here. Then you have the transfer hall, then the tunnel going to the platforms, and then the transfer bridge. So you have to imagine, if you come from the city on this level, you can walk over this bridge from outside the transfer hall, and then walk just on the edge of the train station into this area here to come to this higher level where this office square is, to connect yourself to these programs on the side and this program here. But the conference hall and also in the horizontal part where some other offices are integrated. You can see it here much better. But that meant stapling all these programs that we could not connect all the different column systems with each other. So you can imagine that an infrastructural part of a bus station needs an other column system than the parking. That the offices need another column system. So what we did was to invent a totally new system, these V-walls, to connect all these different programs with each other and to bring the daylight deep down into the car park. Also air ventilation, orientation, and all the public movement coming from the car park was introduced through these V-walls to bring the public up to the train station. So they became the huge bridges, you could say, for the whole project to carry all these programs on top of each other. And next to that, we connected also the aspects around energy and sustainable compact to that related as well. So in a way how we used the warmth of the earth and the coolness towards the way how we could cool and warm up the areas and the energy in the winter, for instance, and even all the trash and elements of dirt coming from many parts of the site, even during the builder's site, had been introduced in a central tunnel, where from many locations you would be able to throw your trash in the central system in order to bring it to one oven to be heated and then turned into energy again. So actually, I mean, I'm talking here about the 90s. To introduce for a site such a urban sustainable concept was quite unusual for the city to integrate it in the city and to be happy to have that part of their project. Here you see this V-wall more closer, and also the way how the car park is connected to that on the lower side. And you can see the car park is having no columns. People were so happy with color in the car park, and particularly with the way how we were able to introduce also a lot of artificial light, apart from the daylight. Because it's almost, as we said, it became the lobby of the location, and as you can see, it was later on many times used for many other functions than only being a car park alone. And that was all done, this car park was all done 7 years after we started with the project. So this was the earlier part of the process of the project, and the rest still had to be built. On top of the V-walls, we were able to introduce column elements, larger column elements, to introduce then on top of that the quite minimal amount of construction we wanted to have for the transfer hall. And the reason why we wanted to have not so many columns there in the transfer hall, because we wanted to make sure that you would have a lot of daylight coming in this central heart of the station, that you would always be able to see everything around you, and that you would know where to go, so that the transfer hall would be a location where wayfinding was promoted by the architecture. And that was quite an interesting process of how we came to that. You see here a wayfinding element in the middle of the station, but it's the only one you can find, apart from the ones on the platforms. So, but how came we to this strategy of working related to the formal elements in the project of the design process over all these years? And the only way how to explain this good enough is that it is connected to the research we did in that time in many other projects, and I will show you that later on, like from the Mercedes-Benz project, you know, that the museum in Stuttgart, to the Villa A&M or the Graz Theater, where we also worked a lot with this mathematical ideas around double twisted surfaces, and the idea of the ecosystem of the knowledge platforms, and even now the work fields as we have them in the studio. They were all promoting this idea of working with these design models, as we call them over the years, or the big details of the way how you can add all these parameters within the project. So you have to imagine that if you have so much diverse information, from constructive information, sustainable information, political information, infrastructural information, the way how you have to deal with the organization of the site, we needed to understand of how you would start to select and edit that information. And this has been always my critique towards the way how we deal with parametric design, that you need to make sure that you know in which way what information starts to melt the information the right way together with another form of information, so that you know where you hybridize the information, or where a particular form or a particular detail can start to bring all this information in a far more reductive element together, in order to allow the diverse complexity of this information to be enriched in the experience of the architecture. So I hope I'm clear there, but if I'm not clear, then we would need to have a discussion after it later on. But I hopefully can explain it through this way of how we went through different experimental organizational studies, for instance. Like if you think about the history of the grid as an organizational system, but of course, for still is an incredible important system where we can work with in architecture, and you apply it to a column system or an organizational system for construction, then that is one way of working with an organizational device. But we discovered that with, for instance, mathematical services, and you know it, for instance, with the Möbius belt, if you cross your arms and you pull them in a Möbius structure, then the arms, they support each other, and that's what I discovered with single surfaces, or the way how you work with mathematical surfaces, is that the system starts to support itself as an organization. And the more complex you make that system, like with a trifold organization or with a ciphered surface, then what happens is that not only the surface starts to support the construction, but also particularly the edges. And with that, I was able to introduce much bigger spans in an organization and create far more flexibility than I had ever done in our architecture before. So this is the way how it works. You have a surface, but particularly the edges are the ones where all the forces go through, and that was purely discovered by all the studies we had done, and that's what we introduced in the twisting element for the way how we carried the roof structure, and some other elements within the organization of the transfer hall. But it allowed us also to create openings in the surfaces. So what I know, whenever you make a surface within a column system, then it's often quite difficult to make quite relaxed, quite expressive openings. So how then these larger details or these design models operate is to be found in these four elements, who are the essential ones who structured the whole project of the Arnhem train station. So the V-walls, the cutting of the landscape surface, as I explained, then the whole idea of how the volume of the transfer hall was to be seen as a volumetric Kleinbottle, or volumetric Möbius structure. So you know the Kleinbottle, it's a surface that goes from the outside to the inside to the outside as one endless surface where there is no dead end. And maybe this idea of a no dead end I'd like to come back to later. And of course, out of that system, the twist came in order to use that as an editing element and as a structural element to bring this project together. And the reason why I'm talking so in detail about this design tool or these design methods is because I really learned from it so much myself. Because as an experiment, when I was in the meantime working in the so 15 years after we I have to say 7 or 8 years after we started with the Arnhem train station, we did a research for a train station in Manhattan, the Penn Station, and we used there a method similarly as we started with Arnhem, but in a far more complex way, with how user groups, accessibility, publicness, and time were all to be grouped into one operational model, as one kind of parametric model. But here, when we worked with all these invisible, in a way, aspects of the site, we used there, of course, the method of Arnhem to structure them with these design models in order to organize the site in a particular way. So it's a play between the invisible and the visible aspects of architecture, where I'm particularly talking about here. Another aspect was views. Like I said, I worked with the wayfinder, and my question was to the wayfinder specialist was that I asked him, could you help me to find a way that I don't need any signs in the building, that the architecture will support the wayfinding and that the views will do the same. So we did all these volumetric studies of the way how you would walk through the site and deal with these view tunnels or these channeling systems in order to make sure that you would have no columns standing in the way. So there where there is this black hole, we introduced the twist in order to guide the people around the twist. So in the movement almost of the twist, in the way how it directs people, so that the twist would orient itself towards the way how you would move in the location. You have to imagine this is again the train station entrance. This is the bus station and the other bus station on this side here. So that's how we came to the form. Many experiments we did around the way how we had to build this form, and first there was a study made in concrete, but we went quickly to steel because we were able to build with that the last part of the project quite quick in order also to make it affordable and to keep it within the framework also of the planning of the station in the last part of the phase. And you see, it's almost, well, actually, I was almost going to say it is it looks like a ship, but it was a shipbuilder who did this steel work for all its steel structures, all the steel structures within the hall. But as I mentioned, the way how you walk around the station, and if you come in the station, you always know where you walk. The slopes, the bridges, give you always the opportunity that you can look back onto where you came from. So you always walk in a curve. And I've learned that it gives you so much opportunities if you walk in these curves to look back to where you came from, and that it is you giving you a much better orientation within the location. You have to imagine if you walk in a corridor and you go straight on, you don't have an overview. You have not a view of where you came from. So this play between the curves of the movement and the orientation play here a very important role. And also the daylight played a very important role as well. So that daylight was introduced, or the openings were introduced in order there where the entrances were of the infrastructure. And so that you, whenever you would come into the panorama, you could say, or the kaleidoscope of the space, that you would immediately see where you had to walk to. And this had to also do with a theoretical aspect of architecture where I was for such a long time interested in. And that is that I never believed in the 2.5D experience of architecture as Gideon and Le Corbusier often talked about so in detail. That you would be as a camera in front of your space, and that's where you see architecture. I've always liked the idea that architecture is following you, that spaces are following you, and that you are part of a total kaleidoscopic experience the whole day. And maybe that is also connected to the way how we are living today. We are in so many spaces at the same time, in one place. So this aspect of many spaces, to be in many spaces in one place is maybe playing. That is where we played with in this spatial experience of the station. The bicycle parking, of course, I mean, for the Dutch is very important. You can imagine here there are close to 2,000 bikes to be parked in this part of the station. And as I said, the daylight guides you through the station in order from the roof into the entrance areas of the rest of the location. And as I mentioned, over the years, while testing it out in many other projects, from the Villa NM to the Mercedes-Benz Museum and the Graz Theater in Graz, Music Theater in Graz, we learned that you can also test, so over the years, in a serial manner, these details, these larger design models or these larger details, because they become then of a serial experience of the way how you can improve the quality of your work. And with that aspect, I believe that it is so important not to believe that one project can do all the work, but that sometimes that you need 4 or 5 projects in order to test things very carefully, can do the work before you come to a form of conclusion with the project. And that is for me the reason why INEM is such a conclusive project. And I hope whenever you finish a trip and you are passing by INEM, I hope you will visit the city, not alone because of my station, but it is really quite an exciting city. One aspect I wanted to mention of Graham Harman's argument of the third table is that you have to see, in my argument also, the way how we deal with the form of architecture as an activator, that it activates public events, as maybe Graham talks about the third table. So in third table he says you can see as a place where on the one hand you have all the molecules in the table and you have the practicality as a second element of the table, but then also there is the object of the table, and not that I believe in the pure object of architecture alone, because I'm far more interested in the way what architecture can do, as you understand. But this is what is so nice about, for me, in this project, is that it is making a public constructs, this station, that it brings people together, that it is more a theater of traveling, and that it celebrates the uplifting quality of traveling, and that it allows you to be part of a system whereby you're seen, and that you are part of that total system of to be there in a place where you can use the station in many happy ways, as you can see here. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Ben. I'd like to take this opportunity to change microphone and also maybe open up the debate for Ben. And should anyone have any questions, please just raise your hand. Alex wants to start.
Hi, let's talk about form, because this isn't just an architectural project, this is also a landscape project, and from what I understand, parametric design was very, very important into it. So, what are the guiding principles that help you edit or guide the information that goes into the form? Because you could have the way I understand it, you could have an n-dimensional system of layers that are connected to points in your parametric design, but if you don't know how to edit, how to cut, how to guide it, how to control it, any form can go anywhere. So, what are the principles and how can these principles be translated from an architectural project to an urban project?
Okay. Is it working? Yes. No, but I think you're repeating my argument. So your question is my argument. I'm saying that you have to make sure that if you deal with a highly amount of complex information, you have to edit that information through design tools. Yeah. Is it better? Maybe I stand back to the place where I was, otherwise everything goes wrong. So in a way, I think it is now too loud. But what you're saying is more or less what I'm arguing. I believe that if you deal with complex information and you need to guide that information in the way how you design, you need to develop tools of where and how you edit information. And I explained why, for instance, the V-walls were introduced simply because I could not staple all the programs on top of each other, otherwise with each other. Or the twist was introduced in order to reduce down the amount of columns in the space. Otherwise, I would have had maybe close to 70 columns in the space. So that was an editing strategy. So. But maybe I can extend on your question and ask that question myself. What then makes that form? Because that's what is maybe an interesting question to brainstorm about. Because why is then the V-wall not a twist, and why is the twist a twist and not a V-wall? And that is actually an aspect of that is related to how things work in the space, because it's the same of how you bring a piece of writing together. There is a beginning and an end, and there is a story in the middle, and you want to make it work. And this is what the formal aspect of the V-walls are doing for me. They work in a sense of that they can bring daylight down, they can introduce the ventilation through that space, they introduce a kind of I don't want to talk about functionality to the space, but a kind of rich spatial efficiency to the space with an architectural experience what is unusual. So all these elements need to be balanced out in order to make sure that they work. And that's maybe a complex answer to say, it needs to work, but you know what I mean. It needs to follow your stomach also somewhere. Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
There was many people pointing here, so someone should guide me, because I yeah.
That's me.
Yeah.
of course, continue with the argument. Of course, it's not your project. I don't feel it's a formal project as far as the forms are not are a result of a process. They are not willing to be as an objective themselves. But you talk about urban fluxes. You talk about maybe some sort of fluid structures, behavior, this kind of shells, but you didn't talk about thermodynamics. What I think that maybe a space like this one, you have a very complex behavior in terms of heating and cooling and ventilation and so on. And it seems to me that some of these forms as a result has to do a lot on what, let's say, thermodynamic waves and the behavior of wind and the sun and radiation towards the structure. So as far as you didn't talk about that, maybe I would like to hear something, if there's something in.
No, I thought I touched on it very briefly. For instance, with the cooling and heating, we introduced a system whereby the energy is reused through the way how we use the heat of the ground. But most importantly, it is in the aerodynamics of the way how the environment, or the external forces, let's call them, of wind, the sun, and every form of wind, for instance, were so used that we would have like for instance, we have no double glass. We have the rain. Yeah, also the rain is collected. You're right, but there is not also through the V-walls. All the rain is collected, but the most important is that it is a station what is not heated, actually. So it is actually not so that the hall is heated. It is it is introduced there with natural ventilation. But for me, it's exciting. But I don't know if you think that is exciting enough. Is that it is the circular, economical way of using all the waste in the site. I thought it was quite unusual that the city was interested in having that aspect to be used in this, and that that was an investment, unbelievable. But the effect of it is fantastic. So I think that for me is one of the most interesting aspects of. If you talk about the sustainable, aerodynamic, maybe you could call it even also, a system of the location.
Hello, good evening. What was more interesting for me was the data what you actually collected before the design research, which help you to arrive at a process where at each point you talk about the viewfinding, talk about the flow of people, the traffic intensity, and the political influence. At this age where I think data is very important and it keeps changing every moment, what do you think as architects we consider, and what happens to spaces when we see that it's being changing every moment and every second? As a studio, as a UNStudio, you spoke about knowledge meshwork, where you research about material, data, and technology, virtual reality. You were talking about that in the parliament. So what happens? What does that do to the way we design? What does that do to the way a user uses the space? What happens to the function? And do buildings start to respond? Is it going to be that's the agenda.
She said editing.
And the second question is, being in Barcelona now, what do you think about the super blocks? Everyone is going crazy about the super blocks. Like, what is your feedback as in looking at that? I'm interested to learn from you now.
Oh man, you have 5 questions. But I will answer 2. I mean, when I'm talking about knowledge platforms, then I'm actually interested in the way how you can extend the traditional knowledge of where architects work with. So before it was important that you knew everything about materials, you knew about construction, and if you were even more than only an architect, but you could flirt with engineering, what I always did, then that would be even good. But now, it's quite amazing. But now I'm seriously thinking of even applying programmers to my office, because my latest clients are discussing with me why are there not more sensors in my building? In my car I have 20 sensors, or maybe there are now, I don't know, maybe there are 40 sensors in your car today, and why are these sensors not in my buildings? And why could not the technology of architecture be more be upgraded? So actually my knowledge platforms talk about that we need to be aware that our world is expanding. And my statement about the building industry is still a bit behind. You and I might be in the iPhone phase, but the building industry is still in the Walkman phase. That is the problem. So we need to start to not only educate ourselves. I'm critical to myself. I'm saying, how can I learn more? How can we expand more, or a profile of the architect? And how can I educate with that also the world around me? Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. The first time I saw your project published was at the AA Files, an article by Patrick Schumacher.
Yes, correct.
In the times where I was a student at the AA. But it's quite interesting because you are touching like two aspects that I, after 20 years, especially time, for me it's an opportunity to see the project built and your experience, right? But I cannot forget the Overexposed City by Virilio, specifically talking about time and specifically talking about the station, which is a new kind of port. But my question would be, or more than a question, I would like from you to tell us, to share, in this big span of 20 years, right? The real space and the virtual space divide. I mean, how, as an architect, we can kind of incorporate or anticipate virtuality. In other words, I mean, in 20 years, technology of communication technology has changed dramatically, right? So in which sense do you think it would be interesting to consider, as an architect, the future or the different future stages of a project like this?
That's an interesting question. Did you hear the question? Because I otherwise repeat the question, but that's what I said about that. I learned so much from controlling information. I don't know how to call it, but maybe you can talk about that you have to develop as architects new concepts of control, as I sometimes call it. And it sounds heavy to talk about controlling because you're not really controlling. You heard me saying that I'm not interested in saying to all the members in my office, no, this is what you have to do. No, I want to have interaction. So that's the way how I work also with the way how you can work with the virtual aspects of architecture or the digital, is that if I can in a 3D model discover that there are certain things not fully working, and then I test it into a model, and then we go back to the virtual model again. Then for instance, then I discovered, of course, with the engineers there, that these edges of the surfaces became constructive. I didn't know that before, for instance. I knew these soap bubble experiments of the 60s, of Frei Otto, for instance, where he played with these ideas. But I didn't know that, for instance, that aspect of the engineering of services. So that's a very important part of the way how the virtual and the physical were playing a constant role with each other in the design process. but you know what I just said about the future of architecture. If you would ask me, how would you extend that further into the future of a train station design? Then luckily enough, you know, I can really say that it. And it's not my comment, sorry, maybe, but people say, luckily enough, that it feels still contemporary. When you design something that's quite literally built over 20 years, it still feels of today. But in 20 years' time, I know for sure stations will operate totally different. So that's why I'm talking about with you today as well, because that's why I'm so fascinated in these knowledge platforms, because stations would be maybe competing, or especially train traveling would be competing much more intensely with airplane traveling in the future. Like for instance, if you think about the trains right now, they have you know, not the surfaces you have on a plane. In an airport, you have far more kind of diverse liveliness and opportunities of things you can do in that airport than in a train station today. I mean, maybe this is touching on this future of train stations, but I think it will be much more interactive. It will be far more competitive than with other infrastructural entities than we deal with right now. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Continuing on this topic, I would like to say that the first time I saw this, I remembered the Dutch pavilion in the Triennale in '96.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of similarities, and I see that was a bit more. Had a little bit more interaction. We were speaking about virtual reality, how do you follow space, all this stuff, and the twist as well. So I would like to really know what has changed from the '96 to now, and what have you learned from that?
Well, you guys are very good. No, but I mean, to know that this station was already published in AA Files, and Patrick Schumacher being the first one to be enthusiastic about it is quite an important special information. And that you know the Triennale Pavilion is quite unusual too, because it's not so well published. So thank you for having that. That's very nice, detailed question. You know, it was a project I did with Ole Bouwman. And it was quite an ambitious project. We wanted to, for the first time, play with how the virtual and the physical could have an interaction onto each other whenever we would project the virtual onto the physical by distortion, how you would distort space, and how it would create, let's say, a non-linear experience. And Ole was more interested in the media side of this aspect of the spatial experience, and we were more interested in the physical distortion of spaces in that time. And you're totally right that there is a lot to be found in this station related to that pavilion. You're totally right, because it was the first project where I tested. I think it's the only first project where we tested double curves, and we made them ourselves, you know, by hand, in a very quite pragmatic, simple pavilion. But this is interesting to talk about, because I started to learn also that you have non-orientable aspects to a mathematical surface and an orientable surface. So the inside surface of a Seifert surface, so you know, compare it again to the Möbius surface, is having another form of orientation than the outside surface. So that gave me also ideas around the way how you can use surfaces for the way how you can guide and direct people, so that it could be connected towards infrastructure. So you're totally
thank you.
Right there.
Good evening. First of all, thank you for this lecture. as I noticed while doing some research on you before coming to the lecture, I noticed that you share some thoughts with another star architect, which is Ramkulas, that like 4 or 5 months ago in a lecture said, he was talking on the future of how we live. He said that architecture is unbelievably slow art. And the least architecture ever takes 10 years. And particularly in this century, our slowness has been kindly a huge disadvantage. The slowness of architects and architectural work. And you said the same maybe in an interview like a few months ago, that architecture is also slow. But at the same time, we noticed that technology is really going really fast. So my question, as you mentioned also, that this project took 20 years to be finished, no? So my question is mainly can architects still build now what they have planned like 10 or 20 years ago, or planned or designed 10 or 20 years ago? Can we still build it nowadays? And do you think that as a practitioner, that architecture and architects are in conflict or in a kind of a race with time and technology? Or you think it's an attempt, they are in an attempt to control or to domesticate technologies? And the last question is, do you believe that every building should have an expected lifespan, and due to this huge change in technologies and everyday technologies are changing? Thank you.
Yes, but the reason why I said that architecture is slow, because I can really prove it with this train station, and I don't think that the architect you mentioned is yet having had the experience of a project over 20 years. So I can have, I have the real experience here. So, but I'm not complaining about that. I'm not saying that it is, that it is a bad side of the profession. It's even, in my argument, it's even a good side of it. But what I want to say is that it is not very good for the public. It's not very good for the public, but because the people here in the city of Arnhem, they had to deal with a kind of display station. Was a shed there for I call it a temporary station, but it was not very well connected to the train platforms, etc. So there was a lot of complaints, and we needed to do a lot of education towards the way how the quality of the project would improve over time during all these years. So it was quite a difficult public aspect related to slowness of urban planning and architecture. But don't forget, if you think about urban plans, not architecture, but major master plans, then they often take 10 to 20 years. And even in China or in other parts of the world where one is so ambitious to build large cities. But let me come to your last part of your questions. Of course you can speed up with projects. I can give you an example. For instance, with certain projects lately of the last years, I was able to build much quicker. Like, for instance, the Atmore Tower, the residential project in Singapore, that was built close to 1.5 years, while it is very complex. But what we did was to learn from this, and for instance, what we did was to work with around 17 elements we used as kind of prefab elements in order to play with, in order to use them as close to 44 variants we could introduce with these 17 elements. So what I'm saying also here with complex forms is that if you discipline them well, then then you can also build them in a much quicker and faster way. And that is what is now possible today. You know, you can produce architecture also different. With new CNC techniques, the production of architecture is actually not so unbelievable advanced in certain places, but luckily enough there are certain contractors who are really going for it, and they believe that quickness, as you can call it, is part of their culture. Like in Asia, to finish it off, in Asia, quickness is not seen as something what is commercial. We in the West see something what is quick as commercial. We often think, oh, it needs to be done fast, and then, you know, we cannot do it because you guys want to only learn money, or want to get money out of it. That's not what I've learned in Asia. It's more to deal with a particular cultural quality of things where there is another form of urgency connected to it, and that's, I think, where maybe also we as architects we talk about in this global setting, that we deal with this urgency in another way, and it's a real problem, because it's not the slowness what is a problem, maybe on the one hand, but the quickness is also a problem, because the tension we get from some clients is quite high. Use otherwise my microphone.
Andre?
Hi. Okay, thanks. Thanks so much for the lecture. It was great. When you were describing this project, I couldn't stop thinking about Saarinen TWA terminal in every image that you show. And my question is related to the role of the architect. If Saarinen was before literally inside the models trying to understand the space, in your version, it's a different kind of architect that you are. And my question is, how do you see the evolution of, or repositioning the role of the architect in terms of the instruments that are available, that are so fast right now? I mean, we're even here talking about artificial intelligence and complexity and optimization systems, where the role of the architect is profoundly different than when it was, you know, even 20 years ago or 40 or 50 years ago. I would like your opinion on that.
Okay, so I give it. You know, I can use two, but that's an interesting question related to, you know, of course, Saarinen is in my mind when I sometimes design, or Molino, or the work of you know, even Gaudi is sometimes in my mind. But I like the way how you can play with the articulation of forms and can pull that quality of articulation of forms back to a more reductive effect of forms. So you're right, there is this reference to that architecture. But I also would like to say that, and some of you might know, I mean, who know the history and the theories of my earlier work, is that I once stated that who cares about the box or the blob, I argued. Let's liberate any style. Let's liberate any style of architecture. We are allowed to do everything today. The only possibility what you can do now with architecture is to play with the transformative aspects of architecture. So the transformative aspect between that what is a box or, you know, a blob or whatever you call it. So let's think about what architecture can do. Who cares about it looks like, you know? I mean, who cares about the style? Architects have this tendency to make or a white building and then they do it all over everywhere. You know, or, you know, so it is, I want to liberate architecture in that sense fully from its form. So I have not one architect I'm interested in. I'm interested in certain aspects from certain architects. But going back to the second part of your question is that I also want to share with you that technology is an interesting aspect of has been always an interesting aspect of architecture in a way. I mean, if you look back to the history of the column, or the way how we played with the articulation of the column, or the way how we dealt with infrastructure and architecture. I think that history of the development of the way how an architect dealt with technology was maybe less so obvious and rich as it is right now. But I must say, honestly, I think we are in the most exciting time ever. I think what you can do now with architecture is so amazing. I never thought that in such a short part of the history of architecture that we could experiment with so many things. And not only because of the architect, but particularly what it can do to a public experience. You know, what it can do to health. But, for instance, I didn't talk about social sustainability, for instance. You know, my argument about making a site lively is dealing with social sustainability. You know, I mean, of course, Le Corbusier and many modern architects dealt with the idea of health and architecture through the way how they talked about bringing more daylight into the buildings, etc. But today, we have so much more knowledge and data, and we can measure them. So with this measurement of knowledge, we can actually do much more in architecture than ever before. But I'm saying also use it. Use these opportunities. Take the maximum out of it. And that's what I'm saying. And that should be the role as the architect.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question.
Hi. We are only here at the third row. That is not a, you know, I mean, there's so much.
About the aspect of the role of the architect in society, I would like to hear your opinion about the activity of architects in politics, and if architects should be more active in politics and more activists. I mean, in a project of 20 years, you've seen a lot of social changes and political changes. So,
I think that is a question coming up more and more over the last years, and I think it's a good question. But don't forget, we cannot fully be responsible as a politician is. I can't having the same public influence as a politician, but I can support a particular political strategy, and I hope that I proved that also today with this project, to stimulate public transport more, or to deal with the ambitions of the way how the government, in a very, I mean, I thought a very liberating way, social way, also very social way, wanted to improve the development of train stations. And actually, I forgot to say that actually I'm not the only one in Holland who developed this intensity and political aspect of the translation of this model in this station alone. From the station in Utrecht, in Rotterdam, Den Haag, Breda, Delft, you know, all these stations have been upgraded. So, but you have to be there careful, I think, as an architect. You can support and help politicians. I work with many politicians, but I don't think that you can play the same role. Thanks.
So thank you very, very much, Ben. And I'd like to thank everybody for being here with us this evening. I hope to see you next week at our next YAC lecture with Jaume Prat, who is the curator of the Catalan Pavilion in the Venice Biennale. And for those